how is your identity defined? I mean, you've heard people say all these things. Is it by your job? I'm a loan agent. So I describe myself by the am, by your gender, I'm transgender. By your politics, I'm a Democrat. By race, I'm Italian. So all those things are particularly parts of who we are in the flesh, but not really doesn't define the essence. So identity is defined by your creator by the essence of your inner being, not biology or feelings, not primarily. All humankind is made in the image of God. So go to Genesis 2. And it's important we go to the scriptures, because if I was going to share this with somebody, this is the exact order I'd share it in. Somebody came up to me and said, "Are you woke?" I would just take it to Genesis chapter 2:7. And so when everybody gets there, just read it.
Then the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being.
Man became a living being. That word nostrils and breath is the same word that's used for the Holy Spirit in the Old Testament. So it's interesting that we only have our life by the breath of the Holy Spirit, that every breath we breathe is as a result of the breath of the Holy Spirit. Genesis 1:26, someone read that.
Genesis 1:26, you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Almost there. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth."
Okay, so being made in the image of God basically means that when people look at us, they see something of God in us, in the actual creation of who we are, and which also includes the part of us that's a living soul. So our actual physical bodies are a representation of God, and being a living soul also applies to all of our affections, our emotions, the way we communicate, sense of humor. All of that stuff is related to our inner being. But that isn't enough to determine everything that's in our identity. But if you were to describe yourself and say my identity, it would be I am a living soul created by God. Number 3, gender is not a social justice issue. It is a definition defined biologically and scientifically. Now, if you were to go ahead and make that statement on social media, you would be completely labeled a racist. And this is the problem that Jordan Peterson's coming up with. He refuses to bow to the woke movement. He refuses to say that you can be a woman if you're a man, or a man, you can be a man even if you're a woman, because but your gender is defined biologically. Now, that's not to say that we denigrate the choice that any person makes if they choose to define themselves by gender or sexual preference. And I'm okay with that too. I don't make judgments about it. But if somebody wants to get theological on me about gender and prioritize it as a social justice issue, I'll join that fight. And because it's absolutely a salvation issue. The bottom line is when you get up and you look out the window and you see a sunset or a sunrise, that is God's stamp. That is his identity. That he has created for us to see as a creator. And if you look at that and aren't inspired, then there's no connection between what the identity of the creator is trying to communicate to us. This isn't in the study, but this is go to Psalm 19.
Psalm 19.
Psalm chapter 19. And someone just read all the way through verse 6, 1 through 6.
The heavens are telling of the glory of God, and their expanses declaring the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their utterances to the end of the world. In them he has placed a tent for the sun, which is a bridegroom coming out of his chamber. It rejoices as a strong man to run his course. Its rising is from one end of the heavens, and its circuit to the other end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat.
That is basically describing the universe and how God created it and how its identity is embedded in the stars. And if you were to go and look at all the constellations, many of them have what it talks about here, the bridegroom in his house. And also that with the bridegroom, he runs his course according to verse 5. So if you were to look at the Mazareth, which is the original astrology of the stars, it's the uncorrupted version of creation and salvation, and the put down of Satan is spelled out in all the constellations. And you should get a book on it and be blessed. Natalie, you said it was one of the best books you ever read, right?
Yeah, it's definitely in my top 5.
Yeah, so just get a book on the gospel and the stars is what it's called, and then just get your socks blessed off about how Psalm 19 is basically presenting forth the salvation of man through Jesus Christ and the demise of the devil. It's all throughout the constellation of the stars.
The real meaning of the zodiac.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's the original uncorrupted version of the zodiac before it was corrupted. 3b, defining oneself strictly by gender or sexual preference falls way short of the definition of humanness and all that entails. I'm not saying that if somebody wants to argue about gender or social justice in relation to how they've been discriminated against, they certainly can do that, but that is not the main priority in identity at all whatsoever. And to compare basically the plight of gender and discrimination with Black people or race is also a miscarriage of justice. Black people have no choice what identity they have or how they were born. Sexual preference, some people say is not a preference, but the bottom line is, as a heterosexual, even if I've had no choice in that matter, I certainly have a role in how I present myself with my heterosexuality. I can be a fornicator. I can have sex with multiple people. I could be bi, and I could present that out there as part of my identity if I choose to do so. If I was going to run, for instance, the gay parade, what would I want that parade to show? Would it be men in G-strings and half dressed and humping each other, as the gay parade currently showcases as the most important thing that in gay identity? Or would it be more appropriate maybe to, and this isn't a stereotype, but just show an incredibly tight interior design float, since gays do develop about 80% of our clothing. Their contribution to art. If that was something that they wanted to put forth, that would be a part of the identity of the gay lifestyle in the sense of what it produces for society and for humanness, not about its individual sexuality. So that's a very important thing to understand. And what's happening to our culture, the whole woke movement, is about strictly selfish identity and not anything that helps in the lifestyle that promulgates an identity within humanness and putting forth humanness. And that's the most important thing that we should be looking at. And so number 1 under B is a heterosexual is not an identity, it's a sexual preference. All gender and sexual choices are preferences. Even if you're born that, it's still a preference. You still have a choice not to pursue it or pursue it. These choices do not determine character or our essence of humanness. All Christian identity is in Christ. Go to Colossians 3. Someone just read Colossians 3, 1 through 3.
Therefore, if you have been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on the things above, not on the things that are on earth. for you have died and your life is hidden with Christ in God.
Right. And then it says in 4, when Christ, who is our life, he's our life, is revealed, then you also will be revealed with him in glory. When the Bible speaks of your life, that's everything that your life entails. Everything. So your primary identity is in Jesus Christ, and everything else rolls out from there. So let's take a look at slavery for a moment, since slavery has become important in the last 200 years. And let's look at its purpose and its allegorical meaning. Slavery is a very important concept in relation to historical understanding and also in relation to the New Testament. And there's also allegorical ties from the Old Testament to the New. Now, there's been a lot to be said about how Christians justified slavery. And when people say that, they mean not only did they justify the institution of slavery, but justified slavery on the basis strictly of race. Now, does the Bible recognize slavery as an institution? Absolutely. Does the Bible put down slavery as an institution? No.
No.
It recognized slavery as an institution of the ancient world, not based upon race, but it had an institution. But there are a lot of myths about slavery that we're going to take a look at. One became a slave 4 ways in the ancient world. You were born into it. You were sold into slavery as a conquered people due to war. Basically, in the Roman world, if a Roman created some type of great act in war, he was awarded a slave by the Roman government. You could, if you couldn't pay your debts, they could force you into slavery. And 4th, you could volunteer to be a slave, which many people did. So the Bible recognizes that institution as a part of society and as a part of an institution, because mostly there were also ways out of it. So let's take a look at that. In Israel, you could not be a permanent slave, and it was voluntary. Could not be a permanent slave in Israel. Go to Deuteronomy. When someone gets here, just read Deuteronomy 15:12 through 22.
If your kinsman, a Hebrew man or woman, is sold to you, then he shall serve you 6 years, but in the 7th year you shall set him free. When you set him free, you shall not send him away empty-handed. You shall furnish him liberally from your flock and from your threshing floor and from your wine vat. You shall give to him as the Lord your God has blessed you. You shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you. Therefore I command you this today. It shall come about if he says to you, I will not go out from you, because he loves you and your household, since he fares well with you. Then you shall take an awl and pierce it through his ear into the door, and he shall be your servant forever. Also, you shall do likewise to your maidservant. It shall not seem hard to you when you set him free, for he has given you 6 years with double the service of a hired man. So the Lord your God will bless you in whatever you do. You shall consecrate to the Lord your God all the firstborn males that are born of your herd and of your flock. You shall not work with the firstborn of your herd, nor shear the firstborn of your flock. You and your household shall eat it every year before the Lord your God in the place which the Lord chooses. But if it has any defect, such as lameness or blindness or any serious defect, you shall not sacrifice it to the Lord your God. You shall eat it within your gates. The unclean and the clean alike may eat it, as a gazelle or a deer. Only you shall not eat its blood. You are to pour it out on the ground like water.
Okay, let's stop there. All right, so first of all, you had to make a slave better and give him more stuff than he had when he was a slave. He ends up being in a better shape. Now, the 7 years has to do with the year of Jubilee. And in the 7th year, what they did is they made, when people owed debts, those debts were forgiven, period, in 7 years. They were wiped clean. That's where we get our bankruptcy laws. That's why you can't file bankruptcy, but every 7 years. That comes from the Old Testament. And so the bottom line is all those debts were discharged, and then you had to set the guy up for him to be able to make a living. So slavery from the standpoint of the Old Testament, and you couldn't treat him cruelly. He was considered an equal in the sense of human rights. In the Roman world, it was permanent, but you could be granted your freedom. The wealthiest of Rome had benefactors who donated to a ransom fund if he should ever be captured by enemies or pirates. So if you're a senator and you went on a trip and you got captured by pirates, you had a ransom at home from your political benefactors who sent that ransom to the pirates to release you from slavery. That fund was known as a redimo, literally means to be redeemed. It was paid to the captives, and the man became literally redeemed. 1 Corinthians 6:20. For you have been bought with a price, therefore glorify God in your body. That word price is the word you purchased. We've been purchased by God out of the darkness of the sin of slavery. I mean, basically Romans 7 says, if you serve sin, you are a slave to sin. So therefore we are redeemed and bought out of the world of slavery to become a different type of slave, which the Bible also teaches. 2, Christians are slaves of Christ according to Jesus and the apostles. Look at Romans 1:1.
Paul, a bondservant of Christ Jesus, called as an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures concerning his Son, who was born of a descendant of David according to the flesh. Oh, is this not right?
That's okay. Paul starts out saying, what's his identity? I'm a bondservant. That literally is the word slave. A bondservant is a slave. That's how he identified himself when he opened that passage. Go to Philippians 1:1.
Paul and Timothy, bondservants of Christ Jesus.
Titus 1:1.
Paul, a bondservant of God and apostle of Jesus Christ.
That's his identity. Bondservant. As slavery was recognized by Paul and other writers as an institution. Ephesians 6:5. Slaves, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart, as to Christ, not by eye service or as men pleasers, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. With good will render service as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. And masters, do the same things to them, and give up threatening, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no partiality with him. So even in this case, the identity is not as a slave, the identity is as a slave to God. Doesn't matter if you're a bondman or free, according to Paul, either way, you are a slave to God. This last example, go to the book of Philemon. This is a book we never look at. You never hear people quoting Philemon. And you might not even be able to find it.
Philemon.
Yeah. Yeah. So you actually have to go and look up where the heck is Philemon, right? It's after Titus.
And before
It's
Revelation.
1675 in my Bible.
I got it. Between Genesis and Revelation. Got it.
Okay, so it's after Titus. And
Yes.
what is this book about? Does anyone, without looking at it or reading it, know anything about what this book's about? Anyone?
No.
It's never quoted. Never, ever. No one quotes anything from Philemon. It's a junk book. God, I didn't mean that. I just meant nobody finds anything out of it of any value in their mind. So let's look at the example of Philemon. And I'm just going to go through it because I'm going to jump around. Verse 2, to Philemon, our beloved brother and fellow worker, and to Apphia, our sister, and to Archippus, our fellow soldier, and to the church in your house, grace to you and peace from our Lord Jesus Christ. And then we go down to verse 10. This book should be called Onesimus, not Philemon. Verse 10, I appeal to you for my child Onesimus, who I've begotten in my imprisonment, who formerly was useless to you, but now is useful both to you and me. I've sent him back to you in person, that is, sending my very heart, whom I wish to keep with me, so that on your behalf he might minister to me in my imprisonment for the gospel. But without your consent, why does he need his consent? But without your consent, I did not want to do anything, so that your goodness would not be in effect by compulsion, but of your own free will. For perhaps he was, for this reason, separated for you for a while, that you would have him back forever, no longer as a slave, but more than a slave, a beloved brother, especially to me, and how much more to you, both in the flesh and in the Lord. If you regard me as a partner, accept him as you would me. But if he has wronged you in any way and owes you anything, charge that to my account. I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand. I will repay it, not to mention to you that you owe to me even your own self as well. But I'll cut you a check if you want.
Yeah, just remember, you owe me. You owe me big time, bud.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, brother, let me benefit from you in the Lord. Refresh my heart in Christ. What's this about? This is about the guy lent him a slave, and Paul fell in love with him as an individual, as a person, and basically said, you know, I would do anything for him, and anything that this has cost you, I will repay. And yet he considers him an equal, a partner, a beloved brother in the Lord, because his slavery as a person is irrelevant. All of us are slaves in Jesus Christ and servants. There's even a passage where it talks about these slaves came in, and he had worked all day, and his master asked him, this is a parable like Jesus, his master asked him to make some food, and he grumbles. And the master says to him, why are you grumbling? You should have just said, I will do this as any worthless slave ought to. That is obviously something that is something we should think about as being a slave. Now, Jesus actually basically said, no longer do I call you slaves, I call you brothers. And so now you are my friends. So although we are slaves, we are now intimately connected to the master through salvation. The only difference is intimacy, which is friendship with the master and slavery. And the last thing, I've already mentioned this for a little while ago, this is number 6. We should all desire to be identified as slaves of God. Go to Exodus chapter 21. I love this passage of scripture. Exodus chapter 21. And when someone get there, just read verse 2 through verse 6.
start at verse 2.
Yeah, start at verse 2.
Yeah.
If you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the 7th he shall go out as a free man without payments. If he comes alone, he shall go out alone. If he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears sons with or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to her master, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out as a free man, then his master shall bring him to God, and then he shall bring him to the door or the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him permanently.
Folks, this is a person who says, I love my master so much, I want to be identified with him. I want you to put a permanent awl in my ear, a wood piece that shows everyone that I'm identified with my master for the rest of my life. And that is the allegory of slavery. Now, notice in this passage, the identity of a person was not besmirched. Your kids were not sold into slavery. Your wife was not sold into slavery. They were individual persons and not considered property unless they volunteered. And that is something that people miss about the biblical part. And that's where the South was wrong in trying to justify slavery and institution, basing it on permanent slavery and then selling the kids as property. A slave was considered property. And even the Supreme Court recognized that a slave was basically 3/5 of a person in the 1860s. Supreme Court of the United States. So, the reason for slavery to be talked about as an institution in the Bible is for us to recognize our identity as slaves in relation to having lost our lives from being slaves of sin to now slaves of Christ. And we have to become slaves of Christ because basically if we serve sin, then we end up serving death in our lives. So that's basically the most important thing. And then the passage already mentioned, which ends in John 15:15, starts out in verse 12, probably one of the most important passages of scripture. I've memorized verse 13 because I think it's probably one of the most important passages of scripture, but memorizing this whole passage is your badge. It would represent your identity as a believer. This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Greater love has no man than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. If you are my friends, you are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing, but I've called you friends. For all things that I've heard from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you that you would go and bear fruit, and that fruit would remain. So whatever you ask of the Father in my name, that he may give you. This I command you, that you love one another.
So powerful and beautiful.
So that is, you can see this is a pretty important message. And not only, number one, making sure that we shoot down people who don't choose their right identity or don't choose the full essence of their humanity. Rather than having to be called a racist, we could turn this around and saying you're falling short. You're not giving yourself enough credit as a human being. What the power of the person you really are would be the biblical message. That you are a living soul, which encompasses way more than what you do in the evening with some other person. And your identity as to how you dress and what you do and all of that is way less than your essence that exists inside your body. If your dress represents something sexual, that is so low on the spectrum compared to you being a living soul and all that entails. And so that would be the message. And the second part would be, hey, you know what? My identity primarily is a slave. And that I'm a slave to Jesus Christ. That's where I want my identity to be. And I have an invisible wooden dowel in my ear that basically said, hey, Lord, I want to be permanently your slave until I die. And that dowel represents his ownership of my life. And that's the message tonight.
That would be so great if in church that was how they presented the gospel of like making the decision for Christ.
Yeah, this is a gospel message. There's no question about it. It ties in your identity, and when you're at the end of your rope, and the transgender community, you know what the suicide rate is?
Super high.
70%.
Wow.
Do you think that the choice to be transgender is blamed upon that? No. You know what they blame it on is bigotry, racism, persecution. But psychologically, there are a lot of big issues in that identity movement that people are struggling with.
Yeah.
Suicide is it's a big one. So, any other comments on this?
I just think it's a really powerful message, and I think it's an unpopular message. I don't think it's ever taught that a part of being a Christian is about being a slave to Christ. I don't think that is in anyone's identity